Good afternoon. As part of our effort to inspire and empower the next generation of mission-oriented talent, please join me in welcoming a tremendous panel about early careers in the tech sector. We have Madeline Zimmerman, Defense and Space Lead at Palantir, Donia Elmansy, Business Program Manager at Microsoft, Zachary Narin, Portfolio Associate at BMNT, and Noah Sheinbaum, Front Door Defense, and the founder of the National Interest Talent Network. Enjoy.
I like water.
All right. What's up, everybody? How we doing? Thank you guys for being here. I know there's absolutely no competition for your time while you're in this Expo Center today. There's definitely no speech over there by the Commerce Secretary. I don't think the Undersecretary of Research and Engineering is down there. So thank you all for prioritizing being here. By a show of hands, how many of you actively work in a tech company today? A couple hands. And how many folks are interested in working in a tech company? Okay, a few more hands. That's fantastic. What I can promise you is this: over the next 40 minutes, we're going to try to make this the most actionable and the most practical panel that you see today. And I'm joined here by three incredible panelists who all have more experience in a few years already than I do in my career. And so I'm going to do as little talking as possible. Madeline, Donia, and Zach are all fantastic. Let's start off, Madeline, with you. Maybe tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you got there.
Great, thanks, Noah. Hi, I'm Madeline Zimmerman. I work at Palantir. I've been there for the last 4 years, primarily working on classified programs with the Department of Defense in more of a traditional business development role. And then I spend probably the other half of my time in a communications type role, working with our CTO on a newsletter called First Breakfast, which is a defense-focused newsletter on fostering innovation in the defense ecosystem from both the acquisitions perspective of how the Department of Defense buys technology, as well as how newer entrants can more easily get involved in the mission at scale. And then some of the other space-focused stuff that I've worked on more on the commercial side has been work with Voyager Space, who's building a commercial replacement to the ISS, and then also work with the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, for their hybrid space architecture work. And then prior to Palantir, I was at another defense startup called Synapse, which was a small 10-person company. I was the first BD hire, and that was out in Silicon Valley. And we were building AI to detect guns, knives, explosives, narcotics in X-ray images. So a lot of perimeter security applications. And that company was acquired by Palantir. That's how I ended up at Palantir. Before that, I was in investment banking, so very different, and I have definitely been happy with the transition to tech. In undergrad, I studied economics, so really quite different, and I can talk more about what the transition from like an economics finance background to tech looked like.
Fantastic. Thank you, Madeline. Okay, Donia, let's go to you next.
Yeah, I have a little less experience than Madeline. So I graduated last year with a degree in government economics, so similar there. But really, when I was coming out of school, I just wanted a job and a job that would be interesting to me. So I applied a lot, did a lot of searching, and landed at Microsoft as a business program manager. Currently, I've been there for about 8 months, working in Microsoft Federal, which is the part of Microsoft that works exclusively with the government. And in my role, I am an investment management lead. So we kind of identify opportunities to invest in Microsoft customers so that we can get them to consume more Microsoft products in the future, and be able to accelerate their technology journey with a few extra dollars from our side. But that's been my experience so far.
Fantastic. And over to you, Zach.
I'm Zach. I'm an associate on the H4X Labs team at BMNT. You're going to hear a lot of acronyms, so apologies up front. But what the H4X Labs team basically does is we're a early stage defense technology accelerator. And similar to Madeline, I'm doing a lot of work right now with Space Force and also with the Navy. I'm doing a lot of tech scouting for early stage companies that are looking to break into the federal government, early stage government dollars, with phase 1 and phase 2s in a few years. For those of you working in startups or government, you'll learn what this means. Before I was on the H4X Labs team, For all of you in college in the room, I worked on a program called Hacking for Defense, which essentially partners a number of really cool folks throughout the Defense Department and the intelligence community with college students, both undergrad and grad, and leverages their really smart talents and technologies and helps them think about new ways that you can serve the DoD. Before that, I had spent a lot of time in the Middle East working on defense and intel related issues. And I realized that I was really excited in technology, but technology not for technology's sake, technology to serve an important mission in national security. That's me.
Fantastic. So as you guys can hear, and I want to, before we go any further, you've heard the backgrounds here. Thank you to SCSP, to Ben, to Ryan, to Diana, to PJ, and the whole team for making space for these kinds of conversations. I think it's easy to come to large conferences, to expos like this, and keep everything at the 50,000 foot level. What you're going to get here is a real candid look at what it takes to break in to technology, and especially technology companies that have a focus on national security and defense, as well as a really, no holds barred look at the types of roles that you could have at some of these companies. So with that, one of the things that folks talk about in investing a lot is the contra portfolio. Right? Everybody likes to talk about the investments that they make. Few investors are willing to talk about the investments that they don't make or that they passed on. And so I actually want to start the conversation today talking about the roles that you each do not have and the jobs that you applied to but did not get. Because I think this is as many of you probably can appreciate, especially if you're in a job application process, this is a battle and it takes persistence and perseverance. So let's go the opposite way. Zach, we'll start with you this time. Tell us, you got to be a mentee. What are the jobs that you left on the cutting room floor to get there?
I didn't leave the jobs on the cutting room floor. I'd say the companies left me on the cutting room floor. For those in the audience, been rejected at early stage rounds, been rejected at later stage rounds. I applied for numerous jobs across the U.S. government. I'm not going to be up here and praise USA jobs. For any of you dealing with it, it stinks. There's nothing to do about it at this point. Maybe Noah can solve that. In terms of the startups and some of the bigger companies, I've been rejected from Google. I know Google's in the house. I've been rejected from Facebook, been rejected from a number of different technologies. Noah didn't ask this question, but I think it's probably going to what you're probably trying to get at here is a few years down the line, the rejections actually serve you well. You realize it's not that important. There's not one job for me. It's not the be all end all. And you realize, okay, that's life. And you do what you do. And you can also find a job that you're really good at and grow within. So that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you, Zach, for the candor there. So Donia, did Microsoft come on campus? Was this a job that was kind of handed to you on a silver platter, or how did that process play out?
Yeah, no silver platters here, unfortunately. Microsoft did not do any on-campus recruiting, but I kind of went on not just Microsoft's job board, but maybe every single company's job board at some point during my junior and senior year of college, just looking around for entry-level positions, trying to find something that I wouldn't hate myself doing, which kind of took me down a few paths, tried finance for a little bit, tried local government, interned at Microsoft the summer after my junior year, which converted into a full-time offer after that. But really, I just had to apply to as many places as possible, kept a little spreadsheet, was a lot of rejected next to the role name on my little Excel spreadsheet. But at the end of the day, you only need one job to work out, even if you apply to like 200. So keep trying for that one to come through.
It's an important lesson in there, which is just keep going. All right, Madeline, how about you? Palantir first swing home run, or how'd that play out?
So yeah, I'm at Palantir now. I was actually rejected from Palantir 3 times before I ended up here. And like 2 weeks before Palantir acquired the startup I was at, I had applied to a writing role at Palantir and was rejected from that. So definitely, you just need to like keep going, and there's not just one path to getting to a certain company. And also like don't take a rejection too personally, because you don't know what sort of other factors might be at play. And I think it's just really important to have like plan Bs and plan Cs and let those play out as well. And also, like, if you really want to, in my case, I really wanted to do defense writing, and I was getting rejected from those sorts of roles. And I just started my own blog and ended up having a lot of success with that. So you can also just take a bet on yourself and build up your own portfolio for the sort of thing that you want. And then you can go point to that, and that becomes really valuable too. Um, and yeah, been rejected from lots of things, also on like the finance side, kind of before Palantir. So it's competitive. I think the way you apply to things also matters a lot. And so just like submitting a resume cold, even if you're like the smartest person in the world, has just a much lower likelihood than finding like a warm intro. And so taking the time to like do the networking thing. And I found a lot of jobs through Twitter, actually. That's how I ended up at the startup I was at. So I know that's not on like the failure side now, but so just being creative with the job search is really important.
Can I actually add something to that? As much time as you spend applying for jobs, I would get really good at either drinking coffee or tea and just saying, hey, can I talk to you for 25 minutes virtually? Obviously, in person is more preferable, but the amount of seemingly senior people who are willing to give younger folks 20, 25 minutes of their time, you'd be really surprised. So do that. And real, Madeline, similar to what you said, it helps with the job, but even for not utilitarian motives, oftentimes it's just nice to pick someone's brain in a simple question. I want some advice. I am evaluating A, B, or C. They'll give you the advice more often than not.
Love that point. You guys said a lot of really interesting things. One that I'm personally partial to, so I want to foot stomp it. There has never been a lower barrier to creating content in a domain of expertise ever in human history. If you're interested in a role, you're interested in an industry, you're interested in a sector, and you're doing that research for yourself, there has never been less barrier to putting that out publicly and to using that as a indication of interest, or to have the conversations that Zach is talking about. So we'll come back to that later. Before we move off the job search process, both Donia and Madeline are recovering finance folks. I hope that's okay that I disclosed that publicly. Both of them considered and had dalliances with the finance industry. So I'm curious to hear, how did you make the decision to go from finance to tech and to national security related technology? And what was that process like? Was that a seamless transition, or were there some barriers to overcome? Donia, we can start with you.
Thankfully, my embarrassing stint in finance was only for the summer, but it gave me the information that I needed to know of what kind of work I like doing and what type of like human, if I needed like a human interaction in my day-to-day role or not. I was working in private wealth management, but it was mostly like doing modeling on the back end and didn't really interact with a ton of people. And it just helped me cater what I was interested in. And it kind of like was a checklist of industries that I had tried. So technology was next on my list. And because it was only a summer, I kind of didn't go through with them with the return offer and was able to look at other opportunities afterwards. So really, even if you're in finance right now and interested in technology, you can enter the industry with all sorts of background. You just need to be able to be a good communicator, and whatever skills you learn in your previous job will be applicable to the technology industry as well.
So I worked in investment banking for a year and a half, and I was really interested in working pretty early on. I realized I wanted to do something like truly mission oriented, and national security was very important to me. I thought about exploring that through finance, which you can definitely do. There was an aerospace and defense practice at my firm, so different defense primes buying other defense companies, but ultimately that just like I didn't feel like I was as involved in the mission as I wanted to be, and just being involved from like a transaction standpoint wasn't that interesting. And so I really wanted to actually be working at a technology company that was producing products that then got sold to the Department of Defense. And once I had that clarity on what I wanted, then I was able to begin my job search. And I think where finance is typically very structured, like you are an analyst for 2 years and then an associate for 2 years, and there's very clear salary brackets and you know what you have to do at each step. Tech is a lot more amorphous, and I think that can be really great because if you find something you're really good at, you can advance super quickly and you're not kind of limited by whatever sort of ceilings exist for these different types of positions. I also found that in my job search, despite having worked at like conventionally very prestigious banks like Goldman and Evercore. And I don't say that to like brag, but actually to point out that those sorts of credentials are just not that useful when you're applying to a tech job for something that's totally not related to investment banking, which I was looking for a role that was doing like business development and strategy for selling products to classified programs in the Department of Defense. And those credentials are less important. And what is important is like demonstrating excitement for the industry, like knowledge of the industry, and then a very clear conception of what your value proposition is for that company. And so particularly, I think startups are a great way to break into tech if you don't have kind of a tech background, and really any other career that you can think of. And I think sometimes like consulting or finance firms try to sell their career path as a way to maximize optionality and create a pathway for you to go do whatever you want to do. But actually, you're going to be able to create that on-ramp for yourself better than, McKinsey can. And so to that extent, you should just, if you want to do tech, you should just decide to go into tech. And then you should think about how you can best connect with people in the industry and market yourself as somebody that will be useful for that company.
I said we would not go more than kind of 5 minutes on this panel without a little good old-fashioned McKinsey bashing. So thank you for kicking us off. And I say that as a somewhat chastened alum of one of these consulting firms. Okay, it was great content on the finance side. What I'd love to turn to, because I think one of you talked about how tech is a bit amorphous. It's not exactly a linear path from an analyst role or even from a degree program into tech roles. Two of the three of you don't even really have formal titles, right? You kind of created your own titles. So let's talk a little bit about what you actually do in your role and how, especially early on in your career, role and title matter versus is just something that you kind of shape and you take a seat on the bus or the rocket ship, depending on the analogy, and just kind of buckle in and see what happens. Zach, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So we can start at BMNT for me. Sure, you come in with a title, but that title very quickly means nothing. 2 weeks into my role at BMNT, and just for context, we're a small firm headquartered in Palo Alto, relatively big office in DC. 2 weeks into my time at BMNT, I was leading what we refer to as problem sourcing seminars. We can think of them as design thinking workshops for 20, 30 folks in the DoD, number of stars on their shoulder. And maybe this is different in terms of small companies versus large companies, but I'd say the day-to-day stuff of what I'm doing and the lack of a title or the not being too formal, you really are jumping in, taking action. Sure, you have your set of tasks to do, but I actually think what's more interesting, Noah, is when you are hit with a fork in the road where do you go the extra mile? Do you not just do your tasks? Do you try to deliver more for a client and then someone recognizes it and then you kind of build that out on your own? I'd say probably a similarity amongst the three of us is that in all of our different roles, sure, we probably have probably have jobs with X number of responsibilities, and we probably don't fit those 100%. It goes out of the lines a bit. Some days we're doing this, some days we're doing that. But yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, I'll add on. Although Microsoft does have like specific roles that you apply to, every single BPM, which is business program manager, which is what I am, at the company does something completely different. You could be on a product team, you could be on a different project, you could be doing a new project every 2 weeks. It really depends on what team you're placed on, and you can really cater your role into what you're interested in. Sure, in the beginning, you're gonna just have to do what your boss tells you to do, but as you gain more skills and you learn more about the business, you have the ability to craft your role into whatever skills and whatever projects you want to work on, which I think is a unique part of the tech industry and being in business or on the non-traditional like software engineering or tech side of the industry, which I think is less so the case with other industries where if you're a first-year analyst in an investment banking firm, you're doing X, Y, and Z every day, and there's no really room to change that.
Today, I spend a lot of my time working with our engineering team and understanding what products they're building, and then also spending time with our customers or potential customers and understanding what their requirements are, and then how to bridge the two and where there's gaps. And so that's great because I feel like I get a pretty good technical understanding from our engineering team about what the art of the possible is. And then I also get to hear from our customers around how that actually ties to the problems that they have. And then, I'll make this about the defense industrial base a little bit more specifically, but in addition to kind of working with our Department of Defense end users, we also work a lot with different defense primes and startups. And so figuring out how we can partner together to effectively deliver on the mission is another big part of it. And so that there's a big relationship component there. And then my first year at Palantir, I spent a lot of time writing government proposals, which might sound boring. Sometimes it was boring, but it also allowed me to understand our product really fast. And so in that first year, that was just a really great foundation that then allowed me to continue to move through different parts of the company pretty quickly because I had formed that understanding. And so if you have any inclination towards writing, I think it's a really great way to provide value pretty early on in your career at a company. The other thing I did a lot of, or I still do a lot of, and I find it really helpful, is learning product demos. And then you get invited to meetings by a lot of important people if you're good at the demo, which you will become good at as you do more of them. And so that gives you great exposure to other people within your company and then to customers. And that's also a lot around narrative and storytelling, which is a huge part of tech. And again, another really important skill that a lot of engineers at a tech company are not necessarily going to have. And so you can cultivate narrative and storytelling, and that can be extremely useful and helps you learn the product as well.
So a number of skills that I think all three of you touched on. There were things around kind of empathy and interviewing and listening to a customer. There's communication skills, there's writing skills, kind of all of these things that fly in the face of a conventional, wisdom that tech is for tech people only, and specifically around engineering. I think it's interesting that we have a panel here of folks who are to different degrees technical in nature, although non-engineers. And so I'm curious if you all have some thoughts on the different kinds of roles. We've got the sign, I think, out at the talent marketplace over here of different job families. What are some of the other kinds of roles that you all have seen in your respective companies or that folks might be interested in pursuing?
I could start it off. It's not so much at my company per se, but sure, you have product managers, you have program managers, you have more of your...
And Zach, what's the difference between product and program, just to lay it out there?
A product manager, by and large, and I'm not the best person to speak to about this, but a product manager, by and large, I would say, is shepherding the delivery of a product. So you're trying to hit certain tech development milestones, checking in with both the engineers and the client or the end user. I'd say a program manager, more broadly, is shepherding, in a government case, the specific contract. So what is the program? And we can get more into the weeds of this, but in some cases you'll find product and program manager type roles. In other places you will find more writing based roles or communications or marketing. At its most basic, I would say, at a number of technology companies, when you really boil it down, you're probably dealing with, and I invite pushback on this, engineers and non-engineers. At its most basic. And I would say those non-engineering skills, back to what Noah said, how do you communicate? How do you get in the room with someone? How do you quickly understand their problem? How do you diagnose that? How do you describe that, not necessarily to a 5-year-old, but to a really smart high school junior or senior, is incredibly important in the national security space. And you'd be surprised how many people have no idea what to do. So I would say those type of roles. And sure, I think a lot of the things that we're learning in college, at least in my case, I was a humanities major, how to write, how to communicate, how to be empathetic, how to actually convey your point succinctly, even in the age of OpenAI and ChatGPT. I still think it's important to do that for the simple reason that people want to talk to a human and not a machine. Those are skills that I still think are invaluable.
Yeah, completely agree. I think there's a lot of positions at Microsoft that kind of all sound the same, but do something a little bit different. Like in my role, I'm a business program manager, but I work with operations, I work with engineering, I work with marketing, I work with finance. Some days I call myself a professional pinger because I feel like I'm just trying to connect people to do different things. So it's really about being able to coordinate and I guess, program manage in quotations, because I don't really know what that means. But being able to just kind of execute. And if you're gonna say you're gonna do something, honestly, a big part of the job is just doing it and being able to connect different people together. But yeah, so there's business, there's operations, like I said, which is kind of, honestly, I hesitate to define them because I think they're different in every like team function and in every part of the company. Like Microsoft Federal has a lot of different responsibilities than broader Microsoft. But I work with finance a lot. So if you're interested in finance but not wanting to go into finance, there's finance at tech companies. There's also consultants. We have a branch of consulting that we work with a lot and that deliver to our customers. There's customer success managers. There's a lot of different types of roles that I think people don't realize exist within the technology space.
One of the classic roles at Palantir is the deployment strategist, which I think a lot of like startups and other companies have kind of co-opted that term, but it's a very interesting role where that person kind of embeds with our customer for a specific project. And so maybe for a year or 18 months, they're working with the same customer for an extended period of time. They're typically on site with the customer every single day, and they're helping ensure that the Palantir product is being used to the maximum effect to actually solve a problem. And so it's not just like they write a check and then we ship them some software and we hope that they're able to make it work for their given problem. But it is a deployment strategist's job to ensure that it's actually solving problems and helping them make decisions better, whether that's increasing how quickly they can manufacture something or increasing the defense lifecycle for a given type of workflow. And the deployment strategist might be building in Palantir software, or they might be doing like a lot of relationship management or some combination of the two. And then something that we were talking about before was my kind of quibble with the term like non-technical. I think a lot of people sometimes think of themselves as either they have a computer science degree and they're technical, or they don't have a computer science degree and therefore they're not technical. One thing, as someone who doesn't have a computer science degree but feels like they are in many ways technical in terms of being able to translate, again, like what did the engineer build and how are we conveying that to the customer? That's a super useful skill. And it's not that engineers can't do that. And I'm really impressed with the communication skills that a lot of engineers at Palantir do have, but there's a high opportunity cost to taking them away from their job of building and putting them in front of customers. And so again, to the extent that you are able to kind of fill that gap, that's really valuable. And I would encourage you not to be self-limiting in terms of labeling yourself as like non-technical and broadening the aperture of what that sort of role looks like.
So a number of roles really that touch on most of the different skill sets that you could have coming out of a job, coming out of a different career, a lateral transfer from another industry. One thing that we haven't talked about as much, and I want to turn to now, is the discussion around, service and really what public service means to each of you. There are, lots of conversations, lots of exhibitors and sponsors here of government agencies, of large corporations, of small startups, and you all have made a choice to put technology at the center of your career, but also a form of service. And so, Donia, maybe we start with you on this. Is just what does service mean to you, and how do you think about the intersection of public service and tech?
Yeah, so I studied political science in undergrad. So coming out of school, I wanted to work somewhere in an area that I was interested in, I was passionate about. And I think government activities in general and being able to kind of progress government technology was not something I specifically studied in school, but looking at kind of job opportunities and seeing this one specifically in Microsoft Federal, it was something that interested me. And I think the work that we do and being able to accelerate customer technology journeys, and I think the government gets a bad rep at being slow at instituting change, especially being able to like adopt new technology. So being at the forefront of that and working at a company that is really putting that at the center of their mission was something that was important to me and something that helped me in choosing my future kind of employer and job.
I think the private-public partnership has never been more important. On like R&D, industry outspends the government now 3.5x. So it's really critical that there is partnership there. And I think it is super worthy to go and work in the private sector on something that is mission-oriented. I would never equate, my job with actually serving in the armed forces, or my life is not on the line at Palantir, but I do feel like I'm contributing to an incredibly important mission. And historically, just as like a history nerd, there is a very rich history of industry sacrificing for national security. And again, fortunately, we're not in a spot right now where industry lives are on the line, but like during World War II, worker deaths from manufacturing in the US were actually higher than those being killed in action in 1942, which is like kind of late into the war, but actually that's how many workers were dying. And at the executive level, you had executives, like hundreds of executives died from heart attacks from the stress of manufacturing. If you are familiar with like the U2, U2 or the SR-71, those sorts of aircraft, the people testing them were actually civilian test pilots at Lockheed. It was not uniformed people. And so those were like civilians that were killed or severely injured, often testing those. So again, not something that we have to worry about at Palantir right now or other parts of the defense industrial base, fortunately. But I do want to just kind of double tap the really valuable partnerships that industry and government have had, and the importance of the strength of that relationship continuing. And I've loved the patriotism of people at Palantir. It doesn't mean that there's like groupthink around everything, but there is a really shared values, and that's very evident going to work every day.
I'd say really quite simply, the US government, the defense industry broadly defined, needs us and needs you. It needs your ability to work on technology, whether you're an engineer or whether you're not. There are real tough problems as big as democracy, problems like election security, problems like data analysis, where Palantir is by far like the lead in that. Big problems that need to be solved, that have defense applications that industry is taking the lead in. Think about semiconductors, think about manufacturing, think about think about maintenance, and the big non-sexy industries, and we could even talk about that, needs the private sector. It needs the private sector to move quickly. It needs your ability to not be plagued down by the bureaucracy. So I really think about it in terms of mission. Again, back to what Madeline said, none of us served, and we're not in uniform, but we are contributing to a mission. I can't tell you, I'd say more personally, I wouldn't want to wake up every day and feel like the only thing I was doing, and sorry again to rip on the former finance background of you two, is add a few percentage points to someone's portfolio. I wake up and I know that the clients that I'm serving, for them, it's not, hey, how do I go make more money? It's, I need to deploy this product in space, or I need to harden this technology for the Navy to use because there are real threats that they need. And we don't want to start thinking about the consequences if they don't get it, or if an adversary comes first. So broadly defined, that's kind of how I think about mission.
Definitely not for everybody, but if you're looking to work on hard problems with dynamic teams and in fun organizations, I'm not sure that there's a better industry than defense technology. So I know we just have a few minutes remaining. Let's do one or two more. The first is big company versus small company. I'm curious how you all think about, especially early on formative experiences. How would you think about the decision to go to a startup versus a large established brand? Whoever wants to.
I think if there's like a big company that you want to work for and you're super excited about, then you should definitely just go for that. I mean, not all big companies are the same. There's going to be a lot of differences in culture. Palantir is the biggest company I've worked at. There's like 4,000 employees. That's going to be really small compared to something like Google, which I think is like at least an order of magnitude bigger, maybe a lot more than that. It's a lot more. So yeah. So, it really, it's really going to vary. Palantir is a big company that has a culture that is pretty flat. I know like a lot of companies say that has genuinely been my experience, where if you have good ideas, particularly on the business development side, if there's an account where we don't have any business there and you have a plan for how we can go win business there, you're given like basically carte blanche to go execute on that. And so that's something I really appreciated. So I would just say, yeah, like all big companies not created the same. Kind of talk to people, figure out what that culture looks like, and then that could be a really great option. If you're struggling to kind of find a big company that has the sort of I think like lack of hierarchy, then I think an early stage startup is a really great opportunity, particularly really early in your career where you might be willing to have a pay cut and like take on a lot more risk. Then that's a great option. And yeah, startups can be easier to like break into, assuming that you have a really good sense of what their mission is and the value that you can provide.
Yeah, I've only worked at Microsoft, which is a huge company. I think the decision for me coming in, I wanted like an established brand, and I kind of didn't want to make up stuff as I go, or like, which startups are great, and I think I did consider them for a little bit, but I preferred the structure that I would have entering an already established space, and with a clear defined work kind of title and expectations. I think things definitely change on the job, like whatever I think Zach was saying, your work responsibilities aren't really what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, but I preferred that structure in the beginning. But with any big company, I think it's important to talk to people exactly where you're interviewing for, because the company is huge. If you talk to someone working in a certain space, is going to be a very different work experience than where you're actually interviewing for. So that's something I would watch out for. Hours could also change depending on the team and kind of the part of Microsoft or the part of a Google that you're working at. So being able to take that into consideration, which is different than a small business. If you're working at that company, kind of everyone has the same work culture, but it does differ depending on the team in a company as big as Microsoft.
Yeah, pulling on Donia's thread, I don't think it's so simple. Big company versus small company. I think it all depends. Sure, you can get the training and the name recognition of a place like, in Donia's case, Microsoft, but you also don't know other opportunities out there. So I really think comes back to what I said earlier. You need to talk to people. You need to understand an early stage startup where you're, I don't know, an early hire that has no training, no processes, no this, and you're brought in and your job was probably, I'm going to do A, B, C, D. And 5 months into that, you're running a team that does that, not because you're so special, because the startup needs that to get done and they have to do that. And you're just in the right place at the right time. Can't tell you the amount of friends I have who took up what seemed like a crazy bet on companies and it worked out for them. Sure. I also have other friends who went to startups that went bust. And you know what? When you're early in your career, no one holds it against you. And if anything, it's a great learning experience. And the simple fact of the matter is that when you're in your job and outside of college, you learn via experience. And your next role, you're thinking, what did I do in my last role where I can kind of apply muscle memory? That's great experience. So I would really be open to both. And yeah.
So in a moment, we're going to turn to the panelists for a final 10 seconds. I'm going to ask each of them to give one piece of advice to somebody who is looking for a job. So we're going to turn to them in a second. Real quick, 3 things for you all. First off, thank you again to the SCSP team, to PJ, to Ben, to Ryan, to Diana. It's special that they're doing this. This is one in a series of conversations around tech. We're doing, this is academia, college to tech, or early career tech. They're doing tech to gov and gov to tech later today and tomorrow. Second is, if anybody wants to talk to any of the panelists afterwards, we're going to head over there to the Exchange Lounge, kind of in that direction. So happy to stick around and answer some questions. And third, if you're interested in the types of jobs that we've talked about today, I run an organization called the National Interest Talent Network, usatalent.org. You can go on there. You can register. We're planning a fall tour of 40 campuses with a group of startups and mission-driven organizations this year. And so would love to have you be a part of that. And with that, we're just going to quickly rapid fire 10 seconds each. Zach, one piece of advice.
Don't be afraid to reach out to people.
Apply everywhere, talk to everyone.
Be on Twitter, follow venture capital investors, follow their portfolio companies, follow other similar people, and you will find really awesome job opportunities on Twitter.
Please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you all for being here today.